It all started on a quiet Saturday morning when I pulled into the driveway of my rental property, a small but well-kept two-car garage I owned on the edge of a suburban neighborhood. The property was leased through the county to the sheriff's department for use as overflow storage and parking for patrol vehicles. It wasn't fancy, but it paid well and stayed maintained. I rarely had to check on it, but that morning, I decided to stop by after noticing a strange message from one of the deputies saying there'd been unauthorized vehicles inside. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe someone had parked too close or pulled in by mistake. But when I turned the corner and saw two massive lifted pickup trucks parked squarely inside the garage, my jaw clenched. They weren't patrol trucks, and they definitely didn't belong there. Both were shiny, expensive, and took up every inch of space. The first thing I noticed was the vanity plates. One said Boss Lady, and the other Queen B. I didn't need a name tag to guess who they belonged to. Karen, the HOA president from the neighboring property, who had already made a reputation for herself as a self-appointed enforcer of everything from lawn height to mailbox paint. I had run-ins with her before when I came to check on the building. She once told me that outsiders shouldn't own community property, as if she owned the whole neighborhood herself. She had a habit of inserting herself into everyone's business, and apparently, my garage had just become her latest project. I got out of my truck and walked up to the garage. The lock had been replaced with a shiny new padlock, not mine. That was the last straw. I took a deep breath, snapped a few photos of the trucks and the lock, and texted the pictures to my contact at the sheriff's office. "Looks like we've got squatters," I wrote. Within minutes, he replied, "Be there in 10. I leaned against my truck and waited, keeping an eye out. A few minutes later, I heard the telltale sound of heels on pavement, and there she was, Karen herself, walking briskly toward me with her phone in hand. Her oversized sunglasses and smug grin made my stomach turn. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that made it sound like I was the intruder. I smiled politely. "Yeah, I think you're using my garage," I said, pointing toward the two trucks. Her smirk widened. "Oh, that well, since this garage hasn't been used for months, the HOA decided to allocate it for temporary storage. You weren't using it, and it was becoming an eyesore." She said it as if she had done me a favor. I crossed my arms. "You decided without asking the owner?" she scoffed. "It's in the community's interest. We have bylaws that allow the HOA to maintain unoccupied structures within the neighborhood boundaries. And frankly," she added, glancing at my work truck, "we prefer to keep certain, unregistered vehicles out of sight." The arrogance in her tone was unbelievable. Before I could respond, a pair of sheriff's vehicles rolled up. Karen turned, clearly irritated. "Oh good, I'm glad someone called the police," she said. "This man is trespassing and harassing HOA property." The deputies stepped out, one of them being the same officer I'd been texting earlier. He gave me a quick nod before turning to her. "Ma'am, can I see some identification?" She straightened up, looking confused. "Excuse me," he asked the trespasser, "not me." The deputy's tone was calm but firm. "This property is county leased space. You've been reported for unauthorized use." Her expression froze. "County leased," she repeated, her voice cracking slightly. "That's impossible. This is part of our HOA community." The deputy pulled out a folder from his car and flipped through a few pages before handing her a printed copy of the lease agreement, complete with my name and the county sheriff's office seal. "No, ma'am," he said evenly. "This is owned privately and leased to the sheriff's department. You have no authority here." Her face went red as she looked between the paper and me. "There's got to be some mistake," she said quickly. "We had every right to," the deputy interrupted. "Ma'am, you entered without permission, replaced the lock, and stored personal vehicles on county property. That's trespassing and tampering with government use." The word government hit her like a truck. She stepped back, stammering. I didn't know. I thought it was abandoned." I couldn't help but smirk. "Funny," I said, "because you just told me it was part of the HOA a minute ago." The deputy gestured toward the garage. "We're going to need to access those vehicles. You'll have to unlock the gate." Karen's hands shook as she fumbled for her keys, muttering about misunderstandings. When she finally opened the padlock, the deputy instructed her to stand aside. "We'll be impounding both vehicles for evidence," he said. That made her snap out of her daze. "Wait, you can't tow my trucks. They're worth over $150,000. She cried. The deputy calmly replied, "Then maybe next time, don't park them on Sheriff's property." He motioned to the tow truck that had just arrived. Within minutes, both of her beloved trucks were being hooked up and hauled away. She stood there in stunned silence, clutching her clipboard like it was a lifeline. When it was over, she turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You can't just embarrass me in front of the whole neighborhood." I tilted my head, smiling calmly. "Karen, you did that all by yourself." One of the deputies chuckled under his breath as they packed up their equipment. "You'll get a call from the county about restitution," he said to her before turning to me. "We'll take care of the report and update your lease records. Good catch on this one." I nodded in thanks as they drove off, leaving Karen fuming in the middle of the street. As I got back into my truck, I noticed a few neighbors peeking out from behind their curtains, whispering to each other. Word was already spreading, and I knew it wouldn't take long before the entire HOA knew that their queen bee had been caught parking on law enforcement property. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages, screenshots of the HOA group chat, full of residents furious with her for dragging their name through the mud. She tried to downplay it, of course, saying it was a misunderstanding with the county, but no one believed her. I drove by the garage later that week. The sheriff's department had already repainted the doors and installed new security cameras. A "No Trespassing" county property sign hung proudly in place of her padlock. I smiled, shaking my head. It was a clean ending to a messy situation. Karen, on the other hand, learned the hard way that not every building falls under her little HOA empire. Some belong to people who don't answer to her at all. And as for me, I didn't have to lift a finger to get revenge. The law did it for me. The sight of those sheriff trucks parked neatly inside the garage again was the perfect reminder. She might think she runs the neighborhood, but I own the one place even she can't touch. The week after Karen's trucks were towed felt unusually peaceful. For the first time in months, my phone wasn't buzzing with HOA nonsense or random calls about violations. The sheriff's department had taken over the garage again, making sure there were clear signs and new security cameras installed. I thought that would be the end of it, but if I learned anything from dealing with Karen, it was that she didn't know how to admit defeat. It was only a matter of time before she tried to claw her way back and get some sort of revenge for what she called the most humiliating day of her life. I figured she'd file a complaint or maybe start a smear campaign at the next HOA meeting, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to go to prove a point. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail stamped with the HOA's logo. The envelope was thick, full of papers, and reeked of petty desperation. Inside was a notice of community violation, claiming that my garage disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood and was being used for commercial or governmental purposes not in alignment with HOA guidelines. I laughed out loud. Not only was the garage outside the HOA's jurisdiction, but it was literally leased to the sheriff's department, the one organization you don't want to pick a fight with. Still, the letter was signed by Karen, even though she'd been officially removed as HOA president after the whole towing incident went public. It didn't matter, she was still trying to act like she ran the place. I decided to have a little fun with it. I scanned the letter and forwarded it to the county legal department, along with a note that read, "Looks like our friend Karen is still confused about who owns what." A few hours later, one of the county attorneys called me, laughing. "She's really digging her own grave," he said. "We'll send a cease and desist notice her way. This woman doesn't know when to stop." I thanked him and went about my day, thinking that would be enough to finally shut her down. But once again, Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. The next morning, I woke up to a pounding on my door. It was early, too early, and when I opened it, 2 code enforcement officers stood outside. They were polite but looked uncomfortable. "Sir," one of them said, "we received a complaint about unlicensed commercial activity being conducted on your property." I raised an eyebrow. "Commercial activity? You mean the sheriff's department parking their cars in my garage?" he sighed. "That's what it looks like." The complainant said the property was being used to store vehicles for profit, possibly in violation of zoning laws. I knew exactly who the complainant was. "Karen," I said flatly. The officer nodded subtly. "We figured as much. We're required to check, but honestly, this is a waste of time." I showed them the lease agreement, the county documentation, and even the permit showing the structure's approved use. Within minutes, the whole thing was settled. Before they left, one of them shook his head and said, "That woman really doesn't know when to quit." By noon, I was back at the garage checking the security feed when I noticed a familiar car parked across the street, Karen's SUV. She sat behind the wheel, pretending to talk on the phone while staring directly at the property. I ignored her and went about my business, but part of me couldn't resist the irony. She had spent years policing other people's lawns and fences, and now she was sitting in her car, stewing over a garage she could never touch again. Later that evening, I got a call from my sheriff contact. "You'll like this," he said. "Karen just showed up at the county office demanding to see the lease records because she thinks we forged them." The clerk nearly burst out laughing. "We've added her to the nuisance watch list." I couldn't help but laugh myself. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. That night, though, things escalated. Around midnight, the motion alert on my phone went off. Someone was near the garage. I pulled up the live camera feed and saw a shadow moving by the side door. The lights flicked on, and there she was, Karen again, flashlight in hand, trying to peek through the small windows like a nosy raccoon. I called the sheriff's office right away, and within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up. The officers caught her red-handed, claiming she was conducting an inspection on behalf of the HOA. The deputy in charge, the same one who had helped me before, stared at her in disbelief. "Ma'am," he said, "you're trespassing again. This is an active county facility. You're lucky we're not booking you tonight." She tried to argue that she was just checking for code compliance, but they escorted her home and filed another official warning. I thought that would finally be the end of it, but she wasn't done embarrassing herself. A few days later, I got a call from a local news reporter. Apparently, Karen had gone on a community forum claiming that the sheriff's department was illegally occupying neighborhood property and that she was leading a citizens' investigation. The story caught the attention of the local paper, which decided to fact-check her claims. When they contacted the county for comment, the legal department sent over all the official documents proving ownership and lease authorization. Within 24 hours, the article went live and it didn't go the way Karen expected. The headline read, "Hoa leader faces backlash after false claims about county property." The story spread fast, complete with quotes from angry residents who were sick of her antics. One even said, "She's made this neighborhood a nightmare. Maybe now she'll finally stop." The next Hoa meeting was apparently a disaster. I wasn't there, but a friend who lived nearby told me that the board officially voted to remove Karen from any remaining committees. Her name was stripped from all Hoa documents, and she was banned from representing the neighborhood in any official capacity. She tried to protest, of course, but no one wanted to hear it. Her own allies turned on her after the embarrassment she caused. For the first time, the community seemed united not in support of her, but against her. That weekend, I visited the garage again. The sheriff's department had added a new layer of security, motion lights, reinforced locks, and an updated alarm system. The deputies even joked about naming one of the parking spaces Karen's Corner just to rub it in. I stood there, looking at the clean, freshly painted structure, and couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karen had spent months trying to control everything around her, and in the end, she lost everything: her position, her reputation, and her imagined power over me. As I got back into my truck, I noticed her car parked at the far end of the street again, engine off, just sitting there. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She wasn't fighting for the Hoa anymore. She was fighting to feel important again, to cling to a little control in a world that had finally stopped listening to her. I rolled down my window and gave her a small wave before driving off. She didn't wave back. Maybe she realized, at last, that her crusade was over. Maybe she was planning her next move. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. The law was on my side, the neighborhood was finally free of her tyranny, and for once, peace truly belonged to everyone, especially me. After Karen's public humiliation and removal from every Hoa committee, things in the neighborhood quieted down for a while. People seemed happier, friendlier even. Kids were playing outside again, neighbors were waving at each other instead of whispering behind closed doors, and no one was getting petty violation notices taped to their mailboxes anymore. It felt like the whole place could finally breathe again. I almost started to forget about her, but like most problems that refuse to stay buried, Karen wasn't done yet. She'd been quiet for weeks, too quiet, and in my experience, that usually meant she was planning something bigger. The calm before the storm. One afternoon, I was talking with one of the deputies who parked at my garage, just going over some maintenance notes about the structure, when he mentioned something strange. "We got a call last night from someone claiming we were running an unauthorized impound operation here," he said, chuckling. "Caller refused to give a name, but we traced it to a private number that just happens to match a certain someone's address. I didn't even have to ask who." "Karen." Again. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Let me guess, she's saying you're hiding cars here." "Yup," he replied. "Said we were charging people to store vehicles. I think she's losing it. It would be been funny if it wasn't so predictable." But instead of retaliating, I decided to document everything: every incident, every false complaint, every time she drove past or sent letters. I kept the sheriff's department in the loop too, and they encouraged me to hold on to all of it in case it escalated into harassment. I didn't think it would go that far. I figured she'd eventually get bored or move away. But then, one Friday evening, something happened that made me realize she wasn't just bitter, she was desperate. It started with a loud crash. I was inside having dinner when I heard the sound of metal on metal echoing from the garage area. My dog started barking, and I rushed outside. When I got there, one of the side gates was hanging off its hinges, and a pickup truck, one that looked awfully familiar, was lodged halfway into the fence. The driver's door was open, and there, standing beside it with her hands on her hips, was Karen. Her face was red, her expression wild, and before I could even say a word, she yelled, "You can't block community access like this." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "Karen, you just crashed through a county leased gate. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She waved her hands like she didn't care. "This is still part of the neighborhood, and I have every right to inspect what's inside." I was speechless. She crossed from annoying to dangerous. I pulled out my phone and started recording, which only made her angrier. "You think filming me will scare me?" she said, stepping closer. "You've been using this garage for illegal purposes, and I'm not leaving until I see what's inside." I called the sheriff's office right there in front of her. "You might want to stay put," I told her. "You just vandalized government property." Her expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her bravado. "You're bluffing," she snapped. "You don't have the authority to call anyone about this." A few minutes later, the sound of sirens cut through the air. 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, and the look on her face shifted from confidence to pure panic. The deputies got out, recognized her instantly, and one of them muttered under his breath, "Oh, not her again." She immediately started ranting, accusing me of illegally leasing private property and claiming that citizens had the right to access community infrastructure. The deputy calmly walked up to her and said, "Ma'am, you're trespassing, and you just damaged a secured facility. Step away from the vehicle." She tried to argue, but when they pointed out the surveillance cameras recording everything including her driving through the gate, her words started to stumble. The lead deputy turned to me and said, "We're going to need to document this. Mind if we pull the footage from your system?" I nodded and led him inside while another deputy stayed with Karen, who was now pacing nervously beside her truck. When we came back out, the deputy showed her the footage on his phone clear as day, her driving straight through the fence. "That's property damage, ma'am," he said firmly. "And since this garage is under a county lease, that's a criminal offense." Her face went pale. "You can't arrest me for this," she stammered. "I'm a resident here. I pay dues." The deputy shook his head. "This has nothing to do with the Ho anymore. You're on county land, and you've caused real damage." He gave her one last chance to calm down, but instead, she made the worst decision possible. She tried to grab his phone out of his hand. Within seconds, she was in cuffs. The whole neighborhood heard the commotion. People came out onto their porches, watching in stunned silence as Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of community rules, was led to a patrol car in handcuffs. Someone even recorded it, and by the next morning, the video was circulating online. The caption read, "Hoa Queen arrested for trespassing on county property." It spread like wildfire, and for once, no one defended her. Even her closest allies distanced themselves, claiming they had no idea she would go that far. After the arrest, the sheriff's department asked me if I wanted to press additional charges for harassment and property damage. I thought about it for a while, but ultimately, I decided not to. I figured the humiliation alone was enough punishment. She lost her power, her reputation, and now, her credibility. The county pressed their own charges for the fence damage, so she still have to face the consequences in court. A few weeks later, I heard she sold her house and moved out of the neighborhood entirely. When I walked by the repaired gate a few days after her departure, everything felt different. The tension that had hung over the community for so long was gone, replaced by something that almost felt like relief. Neighbors stopped by to thank me for standing up to her, but I told them the truth: I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I just refused to let someone bully me out of what was rightfully mine. The garage was quiet again, the deputies came and went without incident, and for the first time in a long time, I could enjoy the peace that came with knowing the storm had finally passed. One evening, I sat outside on my porch, looking toward the garage as the sun dipped below the trees. The lights flicked on automatically, casting a warm glow across the driveway. My dog lay at my feet, the air was still, and all I could hear was the distant hum of crickets. It was peaceful, exactly how it was supposed to be. And as I sat there, I couldn't help but think about how everything had come full circle, from her barging into my property without asking to being escorted off it by the very people she tried to manipulate. It was poetic justice in its simplest form. People like Karen think power comes from control, from forcing others to bend. But the truth is, real power comes from standing firm, from knowing the law and using it when it matters most. I didn't need to raise my voice or fight back with anger. All I had to do was let her own arrogance lead her to the edge and watch as she crossed it on her own.